What if the very obsession that defined Europe's most powerful dynasty, their absolute demand for a pure royal bloodline, led directly to its most terrifying horror? They called him El Hechizado, the bewitched one. His appearance defied reason, his ailments defied science, and the pervasive belief was that only dark magic could explain such a grotesque existence. But the real story behind this cursed ruler is far more disturbing than any spell. This is the truth behind Charles II of Spain. Imagine being a foreign dignitary, finally granted an audience with the King of Spain, the most influential monarch in all of Europe. You'd expect grandeur, Majesty. Instead, you were met with a sight so shocking, so utterly bizarre, it would leave you speechless. What could possibly be so shocking about a king's appearance? Here was Charles II, his mouth perpetually agape. His lower jaw, the infamous Habsburg jaw, jutted so far forward it created a permanent, cavernous gap. His lips never met. His words were a garbled, wet mumble. His teeth didn't even align. The top row sat entirely behind the bottom, making chewing a near impossibility. This wasn't just an unlucky birth defect. This was the horrifying, logical endgame of 2 centuries of the Habsburg family's obsession with so-called pure blood. For generations, they married within their own. Cousin married cousin, uncles married nieces. By the time Charles II arrived in 1661, his family tree wasn't just a tree. It was a suffocating inbred knot. His parents were uncle and niece, and unbelievably, both sets of his grandparents were also uncle and niece. The result? A genetic Russian roulette played with the Spanish crown as the ultimate grotesque prize. For Charles, daily life was a constant, humiliating struggle. Meals became agonizing spectacles. The royal kitchen was forced to prepare every dish as liquid or mush. Soup would dribble uncontrollably from the corners of his mouth. Solid food simply fell out. Royal banquets, meant to project power, instead became bizarre sideshows, with servants constantly wiping drool from their king's chin. His own mother, Mariana of Austria, confessed in terror, fearing Charles might literally choke to death on his own tongue. Can you truly imagine? The ruler of the world's vastest empire was a constant choking hazard. But the disfiguring jaw was only the beginning of Charles's living nightmare. His entire body was a medical marvel of genetic damage, a catalogue of ailments that defied natural existence. What other horrors did his body conceal? How could he even survive? At 35 years old, he had the appearance of a severely sick, overgrown child. His head was disproportionately huge and unstable, perched precariously atop a skeletal, frail frame. He didn't walk until he was 8 years old, a development milestone typically reached by age 1. When he did move, he lurched, shuffled, and stumbled like a man decades older, barely able to support his own weight. His spine was so severely warped that he appeared forever hunched, as if literally carrying the centuries of his ancestors' sins upon his back. Mentally, Charles struggled just as profoundly. He couldn't even read until he was 10, and his frustrated tutors reportedly described his mind as a broken vessel. Anything they tried to pour in simply leaked out. He was prone to sudden violent tantrums, screaming and kicking, followed by long vacant silences where he seemed lost in a world no one else could enter. His hair fell out in patches, and those grand, imposing royal portraits we see in museums. They were often elaborate, creative lies, painstakingly painted to hide the grim reality of a collapsing king. And here's the truly chilling part. The Habsburgs knew. They witnessed generation after generation grow weaker, more deformed, less capable. But for this dynasty, the concentration of power, the preservation of their pure bloodline, mattered more than the agonizing suffering of their own children. It was a dark, Faustian bargain, and Charles II was the final devastating price. For any monarch, especially of Europe's most powerful dynasty, there was one sacred, non-negotiable duty: produce a healthy heir to secure the line. Charles II married twice, but from the very beginning, the quest for an heir was utterly, tragically hopeless. Why was it hopeless? Was it a medical secret or something more personal? His first wife, Marie-Louise d'Orléans, reportedly fled the wedding chamber in tears, utterly distraught. Functionally, he was a boy trapped in a dying man's body. But Spain, steeped in its own pride and desperately clinging to the illusion of its king's virility, could not admit this devastating truth. Instead, they blamed the innocent Marie-Louise, subjecting her to invasive, often brutal, fertility treatments and agonizing public humiliation. She died mysteriously at the tragically young age of 26, her cause of death debated to this day. Charles, ever desperate for the son he could never produce, remarried to Maria Anna of Neuburg, only for her to report the exact same devastating reality. He simply could not produce an heir. Meanwhile, across Europe, every major power watched like a pack of hungry wolves, waiting for the frail king to die, eager to carve up the vast Spanish Empire for themselves. And here's the ultimate, tragic irony. The very strategy the Habsburgs had employed for centuries, marrying within the family to consolidate power, had finally concentrated so much genetic damage into one king that the imperial line, the very dynasty itself, with Charles II simply grotesquely ended. When the royal physicians, completely baffled by Charles' escalating physical and mental decay, finally conceded defeat, the devoutly Catholic court of Spain turned to a desperate, terrifying last resort: exorcism. Exorcisms? In a royal palace? Did they truly believe he was possessed? Convinced the king was afflicted by malevolent spirits, priests marched into the royal palace to perform public, theatrical rites. They would shout in Latin, splash holy water, and even force Charles to drink disturbing mixtures of powdered relics and bone dust. He would convulse, vomit, and sometimes even pass out from the brutal ordeal, while courtiers watched with a desperate mix of horror and fervent prayer, hoping their king would be freed from his demons. Servants burned supposed cursed objects in roaring bonfires around the palace grounds. Tragically, Charles himself, simple-minded and desperate for any form of relief, would reportedly feel a brief, fleeting sense of peace after each ritual, genuinely convinced the pain would finally dissipate. At one point, the exorcists grandly claimed to have expelled 47 distinct demons from Charles's tormented body. He would collapse from sheer exhaustion, sometimes not speaking for days. The court, clinging to archaic beliefs, continued this medieval torture, even as Charles's body rapidly failed in ways no prayer, no relic, no holy water could ever hope to heal. Charles II finally died in 1700 at the heartbreakingly young age of 38, and what came next would not only confirm the court's darkest fears, but truly shock an entire continent. What secret was so terrible it could only be revealed in death? The ultimate payoff. The royal autopsy, a grim requirement for monarchs, was so utterly gruesome, its findings were nearly suppressed from the public, the attending physicians found his heart shrunken and black, his lungs corroded, his intestines putrefied and gangrenous. His reproductive organs were, as suspected, grotesquely underdeveloped, a definitive tragic confirmation that the hope of an heir had always been nothing more than a cruel fantasy. His brain was ravaged by hydrocephalus, floating in fluid, and his other organs were so twisted, so malformed, that the doctors collectively wondered how he had managed to survive for so long. Their medical verdict was stark, a chilling, almost poetic pronouncement. It is a miracle this body sustained life so long. Not a single healthy organ was found. For many, this horrific evidence only reinforced the pervasive myth of El Hechizado, the bewitched one. How else, they whispered, could anyone so profoundly cursed survive, unless by some dark, unnatural magic? But the truth, as always, is far darker and far more human. Charles II lived and died as the ultimate horrifying warning, the final grotesque culmination of the dangers of absolute power and centuries of unchecked inbreeding. His death didn't just end his dynasty, it plunged Europe into the brutal war of the Spanish Succession, a conflict that drowned the continent in blood for more than a decade, fundamentally reshaping the map of Europe. His life was a tragedy, his death a cataclysm, and the story of Charles II of Spain stands as chilling proof that sometimes the most disturbing monsters aren't found in fairy tales, but in the twisted, decaying branches of a royal family tree. Thanks for watching. For clear, compelling history, subscribe to Long History Short, your shortcut to the whole story.